The message hidden in our blood. For generations, humans told themselves a comforting story. Neanderthals were the other ones, the failed ones. The heavy-browed shadows at the edge of prehistory who vanished so that we could rise. We were the survivors. They were the mistake. Then scientists did something extraordinary. They pulled genetic fragments out of bones tens of thousands of years old, assembled them piece by piece, and laid that ancient code beside our own. What they found did not just revise a chapter of human history, it fractured the boundary between us and them. Because the comparison revealed something almost no one expected when this work began. Neanderthals had not simply lived beside our ancestors. They had entered them. Their DNA was still here, moving silently through living people, shaping immune systems, skin, metabolism, even vulnerability to disease. The extinct had not disappeared. They had become part of the living. And suddenly, the question was no longer, what happened to the Neanderthals? The question became far stranger. If traces of them still exist inside us, then where, exactly, does their story end? And ours begin. The story we used to believe. Before genetics rewrote the past, the old picture seemed simple. Neanderthals lived in Europe and parts of Western Asia long before modern humans arrived. They were adapted to cold climates, built powerfully, hunted large animals, and survived in brutal Ice Age environments. Then Homo sapiens spread out of Africa, entered the same regions, and eventually Neanderthals disappeared. That was the broad outline. But underneath it sat a deeper assumption. Many people believed Neanderthals were so different from us that meaningful mixing either never happened or barely mattered. In older popular culture, they were often portrayed as dim, crude, almost subhuman. Even when scientists moved beyond that stereotype, a psychological divide remained. We were modern humans. They were a separate branch that ended. The logic felt clean. Two lineages split from a common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years earlier. They evolved apart. One survived. One did not. But paleontology had already begun to complicate that neat narrative. Archaeologists found growing evidence that Neanderthals were not simple creatures blundering through a frozen world. They made sophisticated stone tools. They mastered fire. They hunted cooperatively. They cared for injured individuals who would not have survived without help. In some places, there were signs of pigments, ornaments, and behavior suggesting symbolic thought. That created an uncomfortable tension. If Neanderthals were cognitively richer than the stereotype allowed, then the emotional distance we had placed between them and us began to shrink. And once that distance shrank, another possibility became harder to dismiss. If these populations shared landscapes, resources, and perhaps social complexity for thousands of years, could they really have remained completely separate? It was a dangerous question for old certainties. Because if the answer was no, then the human story was not a clean succession. It was contact, exchange, intimacy, conflict, mixture. And the only thing capable of settling that argument was hidden in the last place anyone expected to find it, inside the fragile molecules trapped in ancient bone. Reading the dead. Extracting ancient DNA sounds almost impossible because for a long time, it practically was. DNA begins to break down after death. Heat, moisture, microbes, and time shred it into tiny fragments. Worse still, ancient samples are easily contaminated by modern human. DNA, one careless touch, one breath, one fingerprint, and the signal from the deep past, can be drowned by the present. So when scientists first tried to recover genetic material from Neanderthal remains, they were not just conducting an experiment. They were fighting entropy itself. The work demanded obsessive precision. Clean rooms, sterile suits, repeated controls, methods designed to distinguish genuinely ancient molecules from modern contamination. What emerged was not a dramatic cinematic breakthrough in a single moment, but a long, painstaking campaign against doubt. And yet, fragment by fragment, the impossible started to work. At first, the sequences were limited. Then the data improved. Bones from Neanderthal individuals yielded enough DNA to begin reconstructing substantial parts of a genome. For the first time, scientists were no longer comparing just skull shapes or tool traditions. They were comparing code, the most intimate biological record an organism leaves behind. This mattered because anatomy can hint at relationship, but genomes can expose it. Bones can tell you that two groups were related. DNA can tell you how related. It can show how long they had been diverging. It can reveal which lineages exchanged genes and roughly when. It can show whether ancient contact was a rumor written in fossils or a measurable event preserved in living bodies. When researchers compared Neanderthal sequences to the genomes of present-day humans from different populations, they were testing more than ancestry. They were testing one of the deepest assumptions in human self-understanding, that modern humans emerged as a distinct kind of being and then simply replaced everyone else. Instead, the genome began to whisper a different story. Not replacement alone. Contact. And then, from the data, something even more startling appeared. Present-day people outside Africa consistently carried small but unmistakable traces of Neanderthal ancestry. Not metaphorically, not culturally, biologically. That was the moment the old wall began to fall. Because this did not mean Neanderthals were just our cousins. It meant they had families with our ancestors. The comparison that changed everything. The first major genomic comparisons did not reveal a trivial footnote. They revealed a pattern. Modern people with ancestry outside Africa shared more genetic variants with Neanderthals than did populations in sub-Saharan Africa. The simplest explanation was explosive in its implications. After some modern human groups left Africa, they met Neanderthals and interbred. In other words, the line between these populations was permeable. The percentage in any one person was not enormous. In many living non-African populations, the inherited share is often around 1 to 2%. But percentages can be misleading. Spread across billions of people and scattered in different segments, the surviving Neanderthal legacy is vast. No single individual carries all of it, but collectively, modern humans preserve a substantial archive of Neanderthal DNA. That changed the emotional meaning of the discovery. Scientists had not merely found evidence of one ancient encounter. They had found proof that extinction was not total erasure. Neanderthals vanished as a distinct population, but parts of them crossed the boundary and continued forward inside us, and the story kept getting more complex. Further studies suggested this mixing likely happened roughly 50,000 years ago, perhaps over an extended period rather than one isolated event. The meeting point was probably somewhere in Western Eurasia or the broader region modern humans passed through after leaving Africa. It may not have been a single place or a single episode at all. It may have been recurring contact across generations. That possibility matters. A single encounter is an anomaly. Repeated gene flow is history. Then came more surprises. As researchers improved the Neanderthal genomes, including high-coverage sequences, they could map where Neanderthal ancestry survived in us and where it did not. Some regions of the modern human genome retained archaic fragments. Others were strikingly depleted, as if evolution had been actively scrubbing them away. So the comparison delivered two revelations at once. First, Neanderthals and modern humans did interbreed. Second, the biological consequences of that interbreeding were uneven. Some inherited variants endured because they were useful, neutral, or simply tolerated. Others were selected against and gradually removed over thousands of years. Even the idea that Africans had no Neanderthal ancestry at all began to soften. Later work suggested that back migrations into Africa carried some Neanderthal-derived DNA with them, meaning the old picture of a sharply divided human map was too simplistic. The web of ancient movement was denser than expected, and that may be the deepest reason the findings felt shocking. The shock was not just that humans and Neanderthals mixed. It was that the human past turned out to look less like a clean branching tree and more like braided rivers crossing and recrossing one another. The species we imagined as separate chapters were overlapping paragraphs. The dead had left edits in our biology. What Neanderthals left behind. Once the fact of interbreeding was established, the next question became irresistible. If Neanderthal DNA survived in us, what was it doing? The answer was both subtle and profound. Some of those inherited genetic variants appear to have influenced the way modern humans adapted to new environments outside Africa. Imagine what migration meant for early Homo sapiens entering Eurasia. New climates, new daylight cycles, new animals, new plants, new pathogens. They were entering lands where Neanderthals had already lived for hundreds of thousands of years. If Neanderthals were locally adapted, then interbreeding offered something evolution almost never gives for free: a shortcut. Instead of waiting for beneficial mutations to arise from scratch, modern humans could inherit useful variants already tested by Ice Age conditions. That helps explain why certain Neanderthal-derived genes linked to immunity became important. Variants affecting how the body recognizes and responds to pathogens appear to have offered advantages in unfamiliar disease environments. Other inherited traits have been associated with skin and hair biology, possibly helping with environmental pressures such as sunlight, temperature, or barrier protection. But this ancient inheritance did not come packaged as a clean upgrade. It was a bundle of trade-offs. Some variants that may once have been helpful in one environment can become liabilities in another. In the modern world, researchers have linked Neanderthal-derived DNA to a range of effects involving immunity, inflammation, metabolism, sleep patterns, mood, and disease risk. That does not mean Neanderthal genes are destiny. Their effects are usually small, distributed, and shaped by countless other genes and environmental factors. But their presence is real and measurable. That is what makes the discovery so haunting. Ancient encounters are not just visible in museums. They are active, biologically, in living bodies right now. A person can carry an immune-related variant that helped distant ancestors survive outside Africa and never know that its deep origin lies in encounters between two human groups tens of thousands of years ago. A tendency in the body, a subtle physiological bias, a vulnerability, a resistance, a small quirk of biology may partly trace back to a world of mammoth hunts, glacial winds, and fires burning at cave mouths. This is where the science becomes emotionally strange. We tend to imagine prehistory as sealed off from us, as though those worlds are finished. But genomes do not respect that kind of storytelling. Genomes carry memory forward without explanation. And in that memory, Neanderthals are not just fossils. They are influences, quiet ones, fragmented ones, but real. The DNA evolution. Tried to remove, yet the comparison between human and Neanderthal DNA uncovered something else, and it was just as revealing as the shared inheritance itself. Much of the Neanderthal contribution did not survive intact. Natural selection got to work quickly. When scientists examined where Neanderthal ancestry was rare or absent in modern humans, they found striking deserts in the genome. Certain regions appeared to resist archaic inheritance. The X chromosome, in particular, showed unusually low levels of Neanderthal DNA. So did regions associated with genes highly active in testes and male fertility. That pattern hinted at a difficult truth. Some combinations of Neanderthal and modern human genetic material may have reduced reproductive success, especially in males. In plain terms, the mixing happened, but it was not always biologically smooth. This is one of the most important details in the entire story because it turns a simplistic narrative into a real evolutionary one. Interbreeding was not a fairy tale fusion of two compatible groups. It was messy. Some inherited fragments helped. Some did nothing obvious. Some created problems and were gradually filtered out. So when we say modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA, we are not talking about a random sample of everything Neanderthals were. We are talking about a surviving residue after tens of thousands of years of selection. What remains is what endured the gauntlet. That also means the original mixing may have been even more extensive than the genome of today makes visible. The archaic fragments we still carry are the survivors, not the whole inheritance. There is a certain irony in that. Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct people, but even within us, evolution negotiated which parts of them would continue. Some traces were preserved because they proved useful. Others were erased because they did not fit the modern human genetic landscape well enough. The result is not just a record of contact. It is a record of compatibility and incompatibility, advantage and cost, adaptation and removal. And it forces a more mature view of what human evolution actually is. Not a march, not a ladder, not a triumph of purity, but a process of mixture under pressure, where populations meet, genes move, and selection decides which ancient experiments will survive. In that sense, the comparison with Neanderthals did not simply reveal kinship, it revealed negotiation at the molecular level. A long argument between lineages, still visible in our cells. What this means for being human. The deeper implication of all this is larger than Neanderthals themselves. For a long time, people wanted human origins to feel clean. One species rises, another falls. A superior intelligence replaces a primitive rival. It is an easy story to tell because it flatters us. It places modern humans at the center of a neat destiny. But the genome told a less flattering, more honest story. We did not emerge into an empty world. We entered a world already inhabited by other humans, not monsters, not caricatures. Humans of a different kind, with minds, cultures, bodies, and histories of their own. And when we met them, we did what humans have always done. We competed. We observed, we exchanged, we moved, we mated, we changed one another. That realization carries scientific weight, but it also carries moral weight. It reminds us that human was never a single pure line marching untouched through time. The category was always more entangled than we wanted to believe, and Neanderthals themselves begin to look different in that light. If their DNA could contribute to immune defense, skin biology, and other living traits, then they were not evolutionary dead matter. They were close enough to us to leave a functional legacy inside our species. Their disappearance was real, but their inferiority was a myth. In a strange way, the comparison between our DNA and theirs exposed not their primitiveness, but our arrogance. It showed that the old urge to divide the past into winners and losers misses the point. Evolution does not preserve flattering narratives. It preserves whatever can survive. Sometimes that means extinction. Sometimes it means assimilation. Sometimes it means becoming a ghost in another population's bloodstream. So the real shock was never just that scientists found Neanderthal DNA in modern humans. The real shock was that the boundary we thought separated modern us from archaic them was partly an illusion. We were looking at cousins and asking whether they belonged in our story, only to discover they were already inside it. And maybe that is why this It Discovers continues to resonate far beyond genetics labs, because it changes the emotional architecture of our origin story. It tells us that humanity did not ascend by remaining untouched. We became what we are through encounters, through migrations, through mixtures, through inheritances we did not choose and often did not even know we carried. The human story was never singular. It was shared. The echo that never fully disappeared. When scientists compared human DNA to Neanderthals, they were searching for evidence about a vanished people. What they found was evidence about us. They found that extinction can leave fingerprints. That disappearance is not always disappearance. That a species can vanish in the archaeological sense and still remain present in the biological sense, diffused through the descendants of others. They found that our ancestors were not isolated heroes stepping into history alone. They were participants in a crowded human world, meeting relatives who were similar enough to change them forever. And they found something even more unsettling than a scientific surprise. They found that identity itself becomes unstable under the weight of deep time. The further back we look, the harder it is to preserve the simple categories we live by now. Species blur. Histories merge. The past resists being sorted into neat boxes. That is why this story feels bigger than one discovery. It does not just tell us that Neanderthals contributed DNA to living humans. It tells us that the human saga is full of hidden continuities, where endings are partial and boundaries are negotiated, not absolute. Somewhere in living bodies today, ancient fragments still endure from people who once walked through Ice Age valleys, shaped tools by hand, watched fire in the dark, and disappeared from the earth as a separate people tens of thousands of years ago. Except they did not disappear completely. A part of them crossed over. A part of them survived every migration, every generation, every century that followed. And if that is true, then the next time we ask what it means to be human, we may need a more expansive answer than we once imagined. Because the genome has made one thing impossible to ignore. The story of Neanderthals is not only about the lost, it is about the living.